All right, episode 5 of the Someone Else Show. Welcome back. And we begin, as we always do, with the weekly recap of the week that just transpired. I'm not British. I don't have thick glasses, so I don't have a questionable agenda either. But the first thing we begin with is probably the most actually important news, which is more Trump appointment news, right, for his White House. And that being the Attorney General position. His previous nomination, Matt Gaetz, dropped out this week, and now the new nominee is Pam Bondi, a former Attorney General for the state of Florida, and she spent 18 years as a prosecutor, then became Florida's AG in 2011. Now, all this, of course, coming as Matt Gaetz faced considerable hurdles in actually securing his nomination through the Senate hearing because of the House Committee on Ethics report that may or may not still come out. I don't know. It was planned to come out, but then because he resigned his seat in the House, they typically don't release reports on people who aren't actually in the House anymore or something. There's like this whole thing, why is he dropping out, blah, blah, blah. But the point being that it was going to be very difficult for him to actually confirm through the Senate, and actually apparently at least 8 Republican senators just come out that at least 8 of them had planned to vote against Gaetz' confirmation, and this again isn't much of a shock. He was expected and declared basically to be the most unlikely nominee to get confirmed, and my working theory was actually that he was more of like a decoy type of thing, where it's like everyone focuses on Matt Gaetz, right, and then every other nominee just kind of slips on by, kind of just, everyone's so focused on Matt Gaetz, it's like everyone else looks completely tame by comparison, and so there's like, whatever, all of you go through, but you, who cares about all of you but you, right? That was kind of the thing. And then when inevitably Matt Gaetz would not get ultimately confirmed, right, then Trump would go in and pick someone actually more reasonable and more likely to get through, right? This is more of a pie in the sky type of pick, where it's like, we're gonna throw you into the fire. You're gonna be more of a distraction, so every other nominee just kind of skates on by. And if for some reason you get through, sure, we'll go with it. But we're expecting you to fail. We have a more legitimate pick as a backup for when this inevitably goes south. So go in there, be the meat shield, if you will. And that's pretty much what happened. Pam Bondi is, again, compared to Matt Gaetz, much more reasonable as a person, but while still, in fact, being very much on the right, still in line with the whole Republican agenda, the Trump agenda. And the left, of course, is already trembling in their boots, and they already were with Matt Gaetz, because he's more of a wild card. He's more of a shoot from the hip kind of guy. But now they're actually afraid of Pam Bondi because she's good at her job. Right here, actually, I have a clip of MSNBC. They are afraid of Pam Bondi because she is someone who can do the job and was picked for the job because she is competent and not because she is a DEI hire.
Pam Bondi is exactly what I was saying in the last segment that we should all fear, because she's competent. We may not agree with her ideologically, but she actually knows how to do this job. So if anyone on the Democratic side or anyone who cared about liberty or justice was thinking, well, maybe Matt Gaetz will screw this up and that'll give us some time. No, Pam Bondi knows what she's doing.
All right, so they're already afraid, right? They fear the meritocracy is what's going on there. Right? And they were hoping that, maybe maybe Gaetz would fuck up because he's more of, again, kind of a wild card thing. But now they're really trembling because they now see, like, oh no, now there's someone really competent. We're screwed. And actually, another pick, moving on with the Trump appointments, there's another pick. Pete Hegseth actually faces some similar scrutiny with allegations that are of a similar vein, right? Sexual misconduct that were actually, they're kind of old, almost a decade old at this point, 8 years old roughly, that were brought against him in 2017 in Maricopa County, California, that were never actually followed up on due to a lack of evidence of any real substance to back up the claim. But allegedly, there was a woman. They were at a hotel bar. There's video of them leaving the bar. Kind of arms locked together, right, as a couple, whatever. And he says that she let him do it to his hotel room, and she says that he let her there. And it's kind of more like he said, she said, or she said, he said, really. But there was nothing really ever there for like anything to really get going in terms of an actual case, like an actual legal case, or like for the police to arrest him, or the AD, or the for any prosecution to be thrown against him. So nothing really came of it. So it's kind of more of like a thing to be left in the past. And it's much more, said and done. Like, there was nothing of this. This was just something, it was alleged, but nothing was ever proven. Right? It's a little more solidified in what it was than the thing with Matt Gaetz, because that's still all up in the air with him. But it does raise this kind of question where it's like, whether or not the Republicans, especially the more senior members, which would be in the ones in the Senate, particularly, want to select someone with any sort of outstanding issue in their past that leaves the door open for attack by the Democrats, because they're already actually going at it. I actually saw a clip from The View, Whoopi Goldberg, right? These ladies that just sit there and drink in the morning, presumably. Right? They do nothing. They know nothing. Their biggest problems in life are that the cupcake shop or whatever doesn't fulfill their order because the boiler was broken, and they freak out because they don't get their cupcakes. Right? That's their priorities in life. But the thing was that was mentioned was like, the joke, I guess, was that you can only get into Trump's cabinet or be an appointment for him if you have a history of sexual misconduct, which is like clearly not, because Matt Gaetz got shot down. Now Pete Hegseth is a little bit more on a hotter seat himself because of his past, so it's looking maybe like he might not get through, especially with the Senate Republicans. Who are more of the establishment in the party, right? They're going to kind of try and keep Trump from doing the really crazy stuff, right, while still trying to kind of play his ball game, if you will. But the left is already trying to, so it's really like, will the Republicans really want to take any sort of risk? Because again, the left is already like jumping on this angle. So are they going to risk it, or are they going to play it safe and say, listen, you have something in the past, we get that maybe, the allegations never really amounted to anything, but it's still there, they still attack you for it, so we're just not even going to bother. Like, sorry, we can't do anything about it. Have a nice day. Trump, can you please pick someone else? But anyways, that's really the two major developments when it comes to his cabinet picks. And moving on to our next topic, we will actually be walking to the next topic because there is no car available, as seen in this ad from Jaguar that has taken the world by storm for all the wrong reasons. Take a look. Right now, Jaguar is allegedly a car company, and again, it isn't obvious because there is no car anywhere in that commercial. So, what is this ad, right? Well, it might help to say that they are a British company. So now it makes, it's a little bit less surprising that they would do this because, as I mentioned several times in this show's short existence, the UK is basically a leftist dystopia, and it makes me wonder actually how many people are going to get arrested over there for saying they don't like this ad. Because that's what we've been covering on the show. They really love to, someone disagrees with something from the left on social media, they go and arrest you. But anyways, the car company itself, Jaguar, has been struggling actually for a few years, right? Quite a while. And actually, as far as I was aware, right, as a person out there in the world, right, the thing that I was aware of Jaguar for, right, being their biggest claim to fame for me personally, was a joke from the former host of Top Gear and then also Amazon's series The Grand Tour. They would always refer to it instead of they would call it a Jag, right? And they would be like, it's a car for burglars and kleptos. And they would joke like they would say they would go to the back of the car, right, the trunk, they would call it the boot because they're British. They would open it up and they would go like, oh, there's a complimentary crowbar and the complimentary burglar mask and all that stuff, right? Because and all they would describe what a Jag owner is, right? They go in there and they're like, oh, can I borrow the silverware? And then they take they take the cutlery and never bring it back, right? The kleptos and stuff. But anyways, they would always go, because it's a Jag, right? They would really enunciate the pronunciation there. They go Jag. But now I guess the joke is that instead of it being a Jag, it's now going to be called a drag, right? Because they have all these drag people in the commercial. But actually, they won't actually have to change really what they do with the stuff the complimentary things they do in the back of the car, right? They could still give out the free crowbars. Might have to change it up. Instead of a burglar mask, they might give a complimentary drag queen dress and some protest signs and some Palestinian flags in there and maybe some Molotovs, right? So not much of a change, but it's still a little bit of a change, all right? Because it's a drag. But anyways, a joke, having fun aside. It's not actually just the ad. They're actually doing a complete brand overhaul, and so they actually got rid of the leaping Jaguar from their logo, and they're also getting rid of the animal from the badges on their cars, assuming they make any, of course. As we saw, we don't know from that commercial. In favor, all of this is being thrown out in favor of basically just a brand text, text only. Like a bland text only logo and whatnot. So actually, I have a comparison here, right? You have the badges, the old one on the left with the Jaguar facing you, looking like it's going to bite you, and then the new one on the right, which is just a circle that's basically cut up by the letter J twice, one right side up, one upside down, and it looks so generic and boring, right? It looks like it could be for anything. The thing that comes to mind for me would be like a fashion brand, I guess. But that's just me. I don't know. But it's so boring and generic, it could be for anything. So it's up to you what you think that would be more of a better fit for. And where it's actually another ironic thing from the ad is that at the very end, right, it has all these stupid messages and stuff about, one of them was like deleting something, I don't know, whatever. But the last one is copy nothing, which is ironic because when you look at the rebrand that they've done, it looks like they literally copied every single minimalist rebrand that companies have been doing for a little over a decade at this point, to subpar results on average. And actually someone compiled a list. And they're actually taking the liberty as a graphic designer, myself, to look at the list and kind of be like, okay, which ones are we're better and which ones are worse. The old ones are on the left, and the new ones are on the right, right? They have the little chevron arrows that kind of point to the new one, right, from the old one. And I kind of put, green check mark for which one I thought was better, the red X for which one I thought was worse. And actually, the one for Spotify, I kind of thought was about equally as good or bad as the old versus the new. And you see the Jaguar one up top, right? They had the leaping Jaguar. And then now you look at the new one, and it's the same. It's very boring, generic text that kind of stands out a little bit from the other typefaces of the other logos, but it's still very boring, generic text that doesn't invoke anything. So, that's they're it's not really out of the ordinary. What they are, like, it's not really an out of the ordinary move or outcome, right? Neither the move or the outcome is really that unique, because again, right, that's been going on for so long. You just saw all those examples of that going on in all the brands out there in the world. But ultimately, when people see this kind of rebrand, right, they're kind of doing what I'm doing, right? It's like you see it and you just go, whatever, it's boring, who cares? And they just move on. And the thing that happens there is, this is why it's been allowed to go on for so long and still continue to go on, I guess, is because no one really gives a fuss about it, right? There's no like, this is probably the most like ruckus that has been brought about from a rebrand, right? This style of rebrand, I think, out of any of those. And it's probably also mostly in part due to the ad actually getting the attention onto the rebrand. Because if it was just the rebrand itself, people would probably just not notice and not care. So it's really because of the ad. But all these other companies, right? They never did that kind of stuff. They never did this weird DEI ads. So for like a decade plus, they would just do these rebrands and no one would care. So ultimately, the brands wouldn't actually learn, and neither would the graphic designers that they hire. Right? They would ultimately learn nothing to add to the nothing that they already knew. But this ad is a completely different, right? The commercial itself is a completely different situation from the rebrand, and it's really what's drawing the attention to the rebrand. Otherwise, no one would have noticed the rebrand. One, because just who cares? Like as a move, no one would care, but also because Jaguar as a company was pretty much failing to begin with at this time, and now they're just going to, they just accelerated towards the bottom. And you would have thought that companies would have learned not to do these sort of things, especially with what happened with Bud Light, Balenciaga, Target, and Hershey's, and then I think a few others maybe. But then again, you remember the fact that Jaguar is British, and then you remember that DEI is in full effect over there and has been since way before the Bud Light incident, because I think that was the first one. So it's been in effect there way before then, and it's still in effect now. So it makes sense, actually, from a cultural standpoint, right, of the country that the company's from, right, the Jaguar's from. But then you still have to be like, well, there still has to be something within the company. There still has to be someone or some department within the company that's in charge of all this. So this had to infiltrate the company itself. And actually, you just have to look as far as the brand director of Jaguar, by an individual named Santiago Pietro Sandy. That's the brand director over at Jaguar. Now, I'm going to play a very, very short clip. And the reason it's short is because this is about as long as it took me to realize, what was wrong with this person as a brand, what was wrong with this person and how them being the brand director would have led to this shift by Jaguar. Take a and pay attention because this will be very short. Take a look.
It is a true honor to stand here.
Hey, you see that? That was very quick. All you had to see, or you had to hear, the very small little bit of him talking, or you hear the list, and you see the outfit, right? And you immediately know what this guy's values are, where he stands in all this, how invested in DEI and all this other leftist junk that, how much he is invested in all that, right? Just from literally the smallest snippet, you can immediately tell the values here that he is instilling on this company, right? Because normally, and this is the thing, right, that happens every time, right? And it's not just brand directors. I think the one with Bud Light was the woman came in as the new CEO. So it doesn't really, just someone at the top somewhere, right? Basically, right? Brand director, CEO, whatever. But these people come in there, right? And they're supposed to adjust to the brand. They're supposed to look at the brand and say, okay, here's what the values of the company and the brand are, what our relationship with the consumer is. I as a person have to go into this role in this company, kind of adjust myself to the company and the brand, and work with it to move it forward. But then people like this come in, right? This guy with Jaguar, they come in, and instead of adjusting themselves to the company they work for, they try to adjust the company they work for to themselves. And so then that's how you end up with, right, this guy's values being instilled in the company, and again, same with all the other ones. And it literally just, they come in, they do one ad, right? Like Bud Light had the one ad. Balenciaga had the one ad campaign thing with the inappropriate children pictures, right, and stuff. And Hershey's had the Hershey's chocolate had the her she pronouns bar, right? These people come and they do one ad campaign, and they just tank the company straight into the ground. Now Jaguar, compared to Bud Light, Balenciaga, and Target and Hershey's, Jaguar was really already like pretty much on its way out the door. It's been down bad for years. Bud Light was I think probably doing steady. Balenciaga I think might have been on the way down. Target was probably doing steady. Hershey's was probably doing steady. But immediately after, just tank. All right, and they've been trying to survive ever since. And actually, one final bit is that with the ad, because all these companies have like different social media for different regions, right? They have one for like North America, one for Europe, one for Asia, one for Oceania, and then one for the Middle East. So you can guess, because they do this, every company does this every time, where they have an ad campaign or something, and then you see, and this actually also happens with like Pride Month, right? Like they put the stupid rainbow thing in their profile for every single like of their social media for every region, except the one in the Middle East, right? Where they just leave it as is, or they put a black square or something, right? Because they know what they can't do over there. And so actually they did the same thing with this ad, where they cut out the bit with that trans person holding the hammer, or the trans man that was wearing the orange dress holding the blue sledgehammer or whatever in the room. They actually cut that bit out of the ad. And actually this brings us to our next topic, because this also has to do with transgender people. House representative, right, in the House, going back to politics, Nancy Mace, on Monday introduced a resolution that was supposed to be part of the House like rules package for the incoming 190th Congress. And this resolution calls for people to use the appropriate bathroom, meaning if you're a man, use the man's bathroom. If you're a woman, use the woman's bathroom. Obviously, this is biological gender, right? What you were born as. And this was, again, supposed to be part of the rules package for the 190th Congress. It is yet to, we don't know if it's going to go through as part of that or not. But if it doesn't, then presumably she will force a vote on the floor for this legislation. And this is because there is an incoming representative from Delaware, Joe Biden's home state or whatever, not Pennsylvania, Delaware. So, it's no surprise that this is coming from Delaware, right? Because it's such a leftist state. But there's a representative called Tim McBride, who calls himself Sarah McBride. He believes himself to be a trans woman. And Right. The issue is that he's a trans woman and he wants to use the women's bathroom, and so Nancy Mace, who was a victim herself of sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, right, of being sexually assaulted. Right, she's been a victim herself of this sort of thing. Obviously, is afraid of having a man in the woman's bathroom, right? And it makes complete sense that you don't want to have people of the opposite sex in the other bathroom, right? You just don't want that, right? And she has personal experience herself, and so she's been like asked by the left media, right? Why are you being so mean? Why are you being so discriminatory? What's your reasoning? Why would you do this? And she says, well, because I've been assaulted. And it's like, you know what? That's a good reason. That's a good reason. You know what? It's like, but they don't do that, right? The leftist media doesn't go, you know what? You might have a point. They don't. They just completely refuse to accept it. And actually, this goes obviously so far as to be part of the Democrat politics, right? The politicians. So House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, actually, they held presser and all that, and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries addressed the topic, and he basically just cries about it, just being like, "You're being bullies, you meanies. You're bullies. How dare you? You're so rude."
This is the lesson that you've drawn from the election in November. This is your priority, that you want to bully a member of Congress as opposed to welcoming her to join this body so that all of us can work together.
And then, of course, you wonder how much this cheap Derek Jeter knockoff runs and cries to his mommy about every single issue that the Republicans bring up that he disagrees with. But it's actually funny because he mentions, this is what you learned? This is what you learned from the election? To be a bully? And it's like, well, actually, yes. This is exactly what we learned. Because if you look at the polls, and this was a big issue during the election, right, the trans issue, right? And if you look at how the American people responded on this particular issue, 75% of the American population was in favor of keeping men out of women's bathrooms, men out of women's sports, right? They were opposing this thing, right? They were opposing it. Right? They were not in favor of it. They didn't want it. Right? And then it's not even 75-25. It's 75 against. 13% were actually undecided, and only 12% were in favor of this. Only 12%. So when he describes it as, this is what you learned, it's like, yeah, this is what we learned, because 75% of the American population said that this is what they want. And then, of course, this is kind of the same old trope where what they do is they get upset when people notice what they're doing. Or they try to just kind of sneak this on by as if it's normal, right? Nothing to see here. Or just mind their own business, doing our thing. And someone looks and notices and says, What are you doing? Wait, what are you doing over there? And they freak out, like, why are you noticing? I'm doing my own thing over here. What are you doing? Huh? Right? And they freak out. They're like a teenager trying to sneak something past their parents into the house or whatever, right? And the parent notice, and the teenager runs to the room. And the parent goes up to the room, and they hear the teenager, trying to hide the thing that they snuck in. The parent goes in there and confronts them about it, right? And they find the thing the teenager snuck in, and the teenager gets upset, like, why can't you just leave me alone? I'm grown up. I'm a grown up. I'm a teenager. Why can't you just let me do what I want to do? And they whine and they bicker, right? And it's like, well, this is for your own good. This is for your own good. Stop doing this stupid stuff. Just stop trying to sneak it in there. Right, we're here to make sure that you don't do this stupid stuff behind everyone's back. And this actually got to the point where Speaker Johnson, he gave in total, he did 2 interviews, and in between he released 1 statement. Now, the first interview was kind of more on the spot, and so his response is more trying to be because he wasn't as prepared, so he kind of tried to give like a more neutral response. It was kind of more wishy-washy. So you got really nothing out of it. But then later during the week, he released a statement that was a little bit more defined of a stance on the issue. And here it is. Speaker Johnson issued the following statement regarding the use of single-sex facilities throughout the U.S. Capitol complex. And then it goes on to quote, all single-sex facilities in the Capitol and House office buildings, such as restrooms, changing rooms, and locker rooms, are reserved for individuals of that biological sex. It is important to note that each member office has its own private restroom, and unisex restrooms are available throughout the Capitol. Women deserve women's-only spaces. And all that is, it defines, he stands more with he defines more of a clear stance on the issue. It's still kind of wishy-washy, all right? It's still a little bit neutral, but it's more defined of a stance to the right. And then, of course, after he releases a statement, then of course he gets hounded by the media again and has to do another interview about it. So here he is being hounded by the media about it.
Bathroom.
Yeah, I'm not sure what more there is to say.
Is it enforceable?
Yeah, like all house policies, it's enforceable, but we have single-sex facilities for a reason, and women deserve women's-only spaces. And we're not anti-anyone; we're pro-woman, and I think it's an important policy for us to continue. It's always been the I guess an unwritten policy, but now it's in writing.
And so there you go, right? That's his response to being asked about his statement. And I kind of want to focus on like that last line, that it was an unwritten policy, but now it's in writing. And now don't get me wrong, right? Having stuff in writing is good for legal reasons, right? Obviously this is why you write contracts. You don't do verbal agreements, right? You want it written out and stuff like that. But the issue is the fact that something like this can even be disputed enough to require the backing of written material in the law is just nonsense, right? That this even needs to be written, right? This used to be just normal common sense, didn't even need to be written down anywhere because everyone just knew what was true, right? And now, right, moving on a little bit, if you ask me, this shouldn't even have been an issue in the first place. One, because this is stupid. Right? If we as a society weren't so dumb, right, we wouldn't have trans people and all this dumb stuff going on anyways. But as far as the situation that we're in right now, I would just say you just don't allow trans people to be elected into government, because if they're trans, they have gender dysphoria, which means that they're mentally, unstable, mentally deficient, and they shouldn't even be in government to begin with. So it would be a non-issue because they're too mentally unstable to even really. They shouldn't be allowed to participate. They shouldn't be allowed in there at all, right? You don't want these people to be, making laws, right? And then, of course, moving on now to another thing the left loves to do, right? They love to, be like, why are you noticing this? So that was the thing with that, right? It was like, why are you noticing what we're doing? And another thing that they love to do is, and they've done this every time for the past 3 elections, right, is in 2016, right, they threatened to move, right? They threatened to leave the U.S. if Trump got elected. And then when he did, they threatened to leave. And then 2020 was the same thing, right? They threatened if he got elected, then they would also leave again, right? The ones that hadn't left already, which was all of the ones that said they would have left in 2016, they didn't do in 2016, so they said again they would leave. And then obviously he wasn't reelected, so they didn't leave. But then again in 2024, they were like, if he gets reelected, we'll leave, and this time we mean it, right? We didn't mean it the other 2 times, but this time we definitely mean it. And of course, most of them haven't done anything. But one has followed through. Right, so far, this is the most prominent one. This is the defamed Ellen DeGeneres and her wife, Portia de Rossi, have completely moved to the UK. Now I say completely. That's kind of like a asterisk caveat thing, because they originally moved there in 2022, but they kept a house in California, so they kind of probably were like, living at one for part of the year and then one during another part of the year, and kind of going back and forth between California and the UK. But now they're listing the house in California for sale, which means they're going to permanently live in the UK. So they're completing the move to the UK now, and they're citing, of course, the reason being that they can't live in the US anymore because of Trump being elected and all the things that he's going to do and whatnot, and they feel threatened and blah, blah, blah. So, of course, meaning that the most prominent, if you can even call her that, because, let's face it, who cares about Ellen DeGeneres? Who actually cares? But the most prominent person on the left to put their money where their tears are is Ellen, the ousted from her show due to being reported for toxic workplace behavior, but compassionate leftist DeGeneres. And, or as one bit, as I have seen and I love, referred to her as female Jimmy, because, as you know, she was one of the unfunnies, on late night television, like sit down late night television interviews, and you have all these hosts are called Jimmy for some reason. So it's like so actually I have the clip right here.
Jimmy, female Jimmy, female Jimmy, female Jimmy, female Jimmy,
female Jimmy. All right, because that's what they are. They're all Jimmy, and they're all unfunny. Now, of course, I have to make the same adage of you wonder if she'll be arrested over there for posting anything on social media. Probably not. But I do have a vote on who I think the next person to join her in the UK should be, and that would be Jussie Smollett. Right? Remember that guy, right? The guy who was also pretty much, not famous at all, but his most famous thing was being an actor in Empire, right? The show, or it was a show? I think it was a show, Empire. Who's now more famous for having the ego, basically, to think that he was a good enough actor to get away with faking a racially motivated hate crime in the early morning hours in Chicago because he really wanted a Subway sandwich at 2 a.m. or whatever. Right, where he hired like two brothers from some African country to wear MAGA hats and beat him up or something, or pretend to beat him up, right? And he was actually originally found guilty of falsifying the hate crime, right? He was tried in Chicago, right? And the judge found him guilty, and it was like, this is a disgrace. You wasted police resources, all the money, all the time, all the man hours, right? And it was a whole farce. But then, of course, naturally they appealed, and it went to the Illinois Supreme Court, which overturned the ruling. Is it shocking that they overturned the ruling? No, it's Illinois, right? So now this fucker, right, just gets to go scot-free for being this idiot, falsifying hate crimes, right? All this, and there's no punishment because that's how they do it. And then speaking of courts, actually another one that I guess we could just say has no solid reputation to stand on is the International Criminal Court. It has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. I don't know if I think I said Gallant right. I think it's Yoav. Anyways, for war crimes and the whole Israel Hamas thing going on over there. And they had previously done they had said they described him as a war criminal and blah blah. He's a bad person and whatnot. And the ICC is just one of those UN left-leaning type international political groups, basically, that has no real say in anything. Like, there's a reason that places like the US, like Israel, like China and India, aren't part of the ICC's jurisdiction. Like, they don't want to be overseen by this stupid thing anyways. It's almost kind of like, if you know history, before the UN, there was the League of Nations, what it was called, right? It was another thing where It's similar to the ICC, where like the U.S. and a whole bunch of other countries like started this thing, but the U.S. didn't actually join it when it like they helped make it, but they didn't join it, or like I guess with the ICC they started it and they left it or something. But similar situation, right? It was just one of those things. Anyways, if you look at the situation, it's like, you know, they're being accused of war crimes, but for what exactly, right? Like what have they actually done, right? Because it's like they're responding to a terrorist attack, right, by an internationally recognized terrorist group, and that because they are a terrorist group, they don't play by international war rules and conventions, so you can't actually really bring up war crimes in this because you're fighting a terrorist group, which by definition means that the rules and conventions of war aren't applicable to this conflict. But anyways, the Netherlands-based court stated in some sort of declaration or ruling or whatever it is, that they believe that there are, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu bears criminal responsibility for war crimes, including, quote, starvation as a method of warfare and crimes against humanity of murder, prosecution, and other inhumane acts. And you can tell immediately this is just bullshit, right? This is they don't like Israel, right? This is a leftist thing, so they just naturally find every way to try and pin something on Israel, right? Israel is actually and has been letting aid in the whole time, right? This is well documented, right? They let in people, right, with food, with they let in food, they let in medical care, right? They do all these things. This is basically like the most civil, like execution of war ever done, right? The whole like the beeper attack, right? You don't get more targeted than right? The beeper attack literally only hurt people who were part of Hamas, right? They only hurt terrorists. So you can't drop bombs from a plane, right, and hit only people who are part of the opposing militant force, right? The opposing combatants, right? You can't carpet bomb, right, and do that, right? Because you would hit everything along the carpet bomb route, or you can't do a guided missile and be that accurate, right? You would still, right, there would still be an explosion and the debris might go and hit some civilians or whatever, right? But this, right, the beeper thing was literally only in the pockets of terrorists, blew up, and not even like a giant explosion that then blew up the whole block. No, it literally just blew off their balls, right? Right? The only way you get more precise, maybe, would be like terrorist-seeking bullets or something, right? It's like heat-seeking bullets, but terrorist-seeking bullets. You know, like they fly through the air and they whiz and they only hit the terrorist, right? That doesn't exist, right? You can't get any more precise than this. You can't get any more, like, humane war. It seems like an oxymoron, right? Humane war, but you can't get any more humane in your execution of war than what Israel has done. So the fact that they're going out there and being like, you know, they're doing all these crimes against humanity and they're so inhumane, it's like, what? I don't know what you're seeing, but that's not what I'm seeing. So it's just completely, because, you know, it's just bullshit. These are just leftists that you know, they do left things, and naturally by being on the left, they hate Israel, that they want, you know, they back Palestine, right? And I'm sure if you go to these people that are in the ICC, all of these people vote to the left in the Netherlands, right? That's another really leftist country, right? This is one of those Scandinavian, right, semi-communist countries out there, right? So, you know, naturally, right, if anything happens, it's always Israel's fault. Even though, you know, there's literally a terrorist group on the other side. And then, speaking of international war, another big thing this week was updates in the war in Ukraine. as Joe Biden authorized the use of longer range weaponry, like longer range missiles or whatever, to be launched. Right, obviously, right, the longer range missiles were already in use, but now he authorized them to be used against targets that are within Russia itself. And this, of course, sparked up conversation about escalation and Putin once again, for the millionth time, threatening to use nukes. Now, if Russia isn't Russia isn't going to use nuclear weapons. They're just not. They've threatened this. They threaten this basically every day. All right, and and they keep pulling out the threat, and they haven't used it so far. And there's no reason for them to actually do so, right? Because it's like these weapons are being fired mostly at supply lines, or actually, they've had this issue with manpower in Russia, where like the population's already super upset, and they don't want to do another even partial mobilization, let alone a full mobilization. So they've just actually started bringing in troops from right, not only troops but also munitions and troops from North Korea. Right, so these longer range things are being fired over the Russian border at supply lines. In North Korean troops, not even Russian troops, North Korean troops that are over there. And if anything, really, the fact there are troops from other countries fighting on Russia's behalf might open the door, I guess, in a way, for not only just longer range weapons, but now you can kind of say, well, if you're using foreign troops that aren't, to fight your war, then maybe Ukraine could get some other troops in there to fight for this. Like, no one's actually going to do that, obviously, because Russia's a little bit more unhinged. They'd probably declare war on the country that those troops come from, because North Korean troops aren't really a threat. They're low quality, and also their munitions are low quality and stuff. So it's like they don't really make an impact, anyways. So no one actually cares that they're over there. Not even the Russians. The Russians don't even care that they're North Koreans over there. They don't give a fuck. They don't care if they get blasted into smithereens. All right. Now the real objective, of course, is to hold Russia at bay long enough that they come to the negotiating table and they end the war, where Russia most likely just gets some of the territory that they've taken, and then in exchange, Ukraine gets no more war, and what should happen is they get truly solid security guarantees this time around, because if you recall from history. The real only reason that this even broke out in the first place, with like what happened in Crimea in 2014 and then now this, the only reason this happens in the first place is because when the USSR collapsed, Ukraine being part of it, and being part of the more forward areas of the USSR towards Europe, the USSR had stationed a bunch of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And so when the USSR collapsed, right, Ukraine had nuclear weapons from the Soviet Republic that were stationed, and Russia wanted them back. But Ukraine didn't want to give them back because they wanted to have that nuclear deterrent against Russia, right? Because it was pretty much known as a fact, and that Russia, would want to take back some of the regions that the USSR had incorporated. They want to take some of these places back. Ukraine, one of the chief among them. So what happened was Ukraine didn't want to give up the nukes because they wanted to deter Russia from ever coming back into Ukraine. But then what happened was there was negotiation done, or it was agreed that Russia would get the nukes back from Ukraine, because it was also kind of a concern that Ukraine wouldn't really have the capability to maintain the weapons, and also Chernobyl happened in Ukraine, so it was already like a history that was much more recent of nuclear failure in Ukraine. So I was really worried that maybe they wouldn't actually be able to properly, maintain the weapons, but also it's kind of a worry that Ukraine didn't have the resources to kind of always worry with these kind of places. Even with Russia itself, where it's someone could be able to bribe and corrupt, and some terrorist group might be able to get hands on a nuclear weapon or two because they're so poorly guarded. And also corruption or whatever. So it's that was a big worry, right? So Russia was thought of as more capable of maintaining the weapons. So there was a whole negotiation done with the Ukraine, the Ukraine, the USSR, Ukraine, Russia, the US, and Europe or NATO or whatever. And so Russia gets the nukes. Ukraine was then promised to not get invaded by Russia with the assuredness of security guarantees, like backed by the West, basically, right? But then, because of that, it never joined NATO back then. And then, like, time went on, and it basically lost its chance to join NATO, along with the other former Soviet puppet states, like Poland, right? Like, that's a big one, right? Like all these are like the smaller ones north of that, like Latvia or whatever the other ones are. Like all those ones joined NATO like a few years after the collapse of the USSR, but Ukraine didn't go with them at the time. Right, that was basically the point where they could have, because that was the trend, and like Russia was in a conciliatory position at the time. But then, of course, they lost out on that window. That window closed, and they've been basically stuck in this weird situation for the longest time. And then, of course, in 2014, Russia takes Crimea, and then they start this war where they take the Donbass and whatever the other one is in Ukraine, and like the main part of Ukraine, because again, Crimea is more like an island. It's a peninsula, so it's a little bit more separated. But anyways, so this time around, the goal would be that there is a truly credible deterrent made against Russia, or like to prevent Russia from basically using this as like they come to a peace, and basically the idea is, right, Russia would, if there isn't a deterrent, Russia would just take the time in the peace to rebuild its military to then try and do this again, right? And then, of course, the argument that is being made against even sending money and aid to Ukraine is, right, it's always the monetary aspect. Like, why are we sending money to Ukraine? It's like, well, we don't want Ukraine to just fall, right? We actually don't want Russia to, right? We don't want Putin to just walk into Kyiv, right, and take the whole country, right? We don't want that, right? No one actually wants that, right? People who want to be cautious about spending and blah blah, but it's like no one anywhere wants Ukraine to fall, right? Really, on the Republicans just want to be like, listen, we'll give you enough to keep you afloat, and then we got to get to the negotiating table. Whereas the people on the left, right, they just want full-blown war, right? They hate Putin because of, Russian hoax, the Russian hoax of, Putin backed Trump. They did things where they got him elected or whatever, so they're fully against Russia by proxy of Trump or whatever, right? It always ties back to Trump. But as far as like the Republicans being like, worried about monetary issues of spending on Ukraine, it's like, one, we don't want them to fall, so we have to give them something, right? So cutting Ukraine spending completely is out of the question. But it's like, you're so worried about that. But it's like, if you look, the U.S. has spent less than 1% of its federal budget on aiding allies, including Ukraine. Sorry about that. And if you look at it, the U.S. has allocated roughly $100 billion to Ukraine over the course of what's just a few months shy of being a 3-year-long war at this point. So it's averaging out to be about $33 billion per year. Now, if you look, right, instead of leaving an ally to wither away because you want your $33 billion per year back, right, I refer to you to something that we touched on in an earlier episode, being the amount of money identified as wasteful spending by DOGE, right, the Department of Government Efficiency, right? If you look here's that list again, right? This is what Elon, Vivek, and DOGE have identified based on a report from, I think it was Paul Rand, right, of wasteful government spending in 2023, right? So in that fiscal year of 2023, right, they spent $900 billion on all these stupid things, right? And we're only spending $33 billion on Ukraine. So how about instead of focus, right, over all these people who focus on, why are we sending $33 billion per year to Ukraine, right? Why are we doing this? Like, maybe don't focus on that first. Focus on the $900 billion, probably even more, because this is just $900 billion based off this short list. There's probably even more things that end up bringing the total over $1 trillion. Right, so maybe focus on getting the $1 trillion back, right? And then spending, right? If you get that $1 trillion back, spending where it was 33 billion or 33 billion of a trillion is 3.3% of the $1 trillion that is wasted every year in spending by the government. So maybe, it would be, wiser to be like, hey, let's get this $1 trillion back and then send 3.3% of this reclaimed $1 trillion to keep Ukraine from just being run over by Russia, right? So maybe we focus on that a little bit. And another thing, actually, that kind of relates to it, that you could also focus on, if you're so worried about money, right? It's $33 billion. There's a whole trillion out there for you to get, but you focus on $33 billion to keeping Ukraine from collapsing, which is pipelines, right? You remember there was this little thing called the Keystone Pipeline that was planned to be built, and then Obama basically tried to kill it before it got before it even got going, and then Trump approved the pipeline. It got construction got underway. It was sort of built, maybe half built. I don't even know how much, but it was part of it was built, and then Biden took office. Then he went back and he stopped it again. So it just kind of has been laying dormant. But then he proceeded to let Russia build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in Europe, which they then used to sell oil to Europe to then finance their war in Ukraine, which they continue to use to finance their war in Ukraine because Europe has to get energy from somewhere, and they've been basically dependent on Russia since America, under Joe Biden and the Democrats, their production of energy and oil and natural gas was stifled, right? So maybe, you also, right, instead of focusing on taking away $33 billion from Ukraine, one, you focus on getting the $1 trillion in wasteful spending back, and taking from that $33 trillion you reclaim, giving a good $33 billion, right, 3.3% only to Ukraine of that reclaimed wasteful spending, right? And if you really want to make up for the $33 billion, maybe you build this Keystone Pipeline and you get oil production up in the U.S., bringing oil prices down here domestically, but then you sell off the excess to Europe to get some revenue in that might even just offset the $33 billion to Ukraine anyways, right? In fact, you could even say that, we're going to rake in some revenue from this oil production. We're going to dedicate a part of the revenue as a fund for Ukraine, right? So you could do that, right? Do that with the pipeline, right? Because this is the other thing that kind of led to the invasion of, or not really the invasion, but kind of has led to the continuation of the war, where Europe is now, it's been under thumb of Russia, basically, right? Europe has been reliant on Russian energy. So if you open up the Keystone Pipeline, get oil production going here in the U.S., you get Europe off of Russian energy, right, which will generate revenue for the U.S. and allow Europe to be free of Russia's grip on the energy. So then they are now more free to oppose Russia without the threat of getting cut off from energy supplies looming over them, which means that then they'll be more likely to kind of help keep Ukraine from falling, or keep it stable, right? So that it's not as much of a burden on the U.S., right? Europe can kind of pitch in, or be free to pitch in even more than they are now if they're not under the thumb of Russian energy. All right, so maybe also consider doing that first before you worry about cutting the less than 1% of the annual federal budget, $33 billion to Ukraine. Maybe focus on the $1 trillion in wasteful spending, and then also getting oil production going up here to then generate more revenue that you can then also use to generate the revenue to give money to Ukraine to keep them from crumbling. And I think that's going to actually do it for this episode. That seems to be pretty much everything I want to go over for this one. And if this ended up having quenched your thirst for a show to watch on the weekends, then be sure to consider subscribing, leaving a like, and coming back here. This is a weekend show. We do episodes on Saturdays, which is today, and then also we're gonna have another one tomorrow, and then every weekend. So you can come back here every weekend. So consider subscribing to be in the loop on when these episodes come out. They come out. I try to get them out 6 p.m. every Saturday, every Sunday, right? The weekend. I'm not going to say which time zone because it gives me flexibility. I could be like, oh, it's Eastern, or it could be Central. Maybe I'm running a little bit late, and I could say, oh, well, it's supposed to come at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, not Eastern Time. I didn't specify. I just said 6 p.m. But the point is, it comes every weekend, every Saturday, every Sunday. So subscribe to come here. Join the show. Hope you enjoy the program. This is a terrible outro. Take care.